All right, so we got a listener request to deep dive into a sermon transcript from Reverend Elnathan Yamuk.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. It kind of blends faith and action.
And the title is Expérimentez la chose nouvelle en posant des actes de foi, which translates to experiencing something new by taking leaps of faith.
That's right, and it was delivered just last week on December 12th, 2024, to be exact, at the close of his series, Prodiges 24.
So kind of a timely piece for a deep dive then.
Yeah, definitely timely.
So what's the core message here? What is Reverend Nyamuke trying to tell us?
Well, the main idea is that God's ready to do something new in your life, like a special blessing.
Hmm.
But there's a catch. You have to meet God halfway by taking these bold steps of faith.
So it's not just wishing and hoping, you have to actually do something.
Exactly. It's like a partnership, a divine invitation to co-create with God, you could say.
Co-create with God. That's an interesting way to put it. And it all starts with this question of what does it truly mean to manifest your faith?
Yeah, that's right.
So how does he answer that?
Well, he connects it back to Hebrews 11.1, where it describes faith as a firm assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
So it's about having that deep belief even when you can't see the results yet.
Yeah, but it goes deeper than just belief. He emphasizes that real faith isn't passive. It's something you show through actions.
So you got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. Perfect analogy. And to make this point really clear, Reverend Yamuke goes into 7 examples from the Bible.
7. Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's hear about the first one.
Okay, so the first one is Abraham, who was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, showing that ultimate surrender to God.
That's from Genesis 22, right?
Hmm.
It's always been a tough one for me to fully grasp. What does Reverend Nyamuke have to say about it?
He uses it to challenge us. He's like, what are you holding on to so tightly that you're not willing to let go of for God? What is your Isaac?
Whoa, that's a powerful question. It really makes you think about the things we hold on to out of fear, maybe pride, even when they're holding us back.
Right, and that's just the first example. The second one is Moses parting the Red Sea.
Okay, so that's Exodus 14, one of the most iconic stories. I can just imagine the Israelites standing there watching in awe as that water just splits.
It's a powerful image, right? And Reverend Yamuk uses this to talk about using your resources for God's purpose. Thinking about what you have to offer.
So it's not always about some huge life-altering action. It could be about using what we already have in a new way.
Exactly. It's about looking at your everyday life and seeing where you can act with faith, even in small ways.
And example number 3.
This one focuses on the priests stepping into the flooded Jordan River.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one, Joshua 3, right?
Yeah.
That just seems like it goes against every instinct, stepping into a raging river like that.
Doesn't it? And Reverend Yamuki uses this to talk about defying the impossible.
Okay, I like that.
It's about trusting God even when things don't make sense, when they seem illogical or even terrifying.
I've definitely been there. Feeling frozen by fear, unable to move forward because the path ahead is too scary.
Right? It's like saying, this is impossible, I can't do this. But then choosing faith over fear.
So powerful.
Mm.
Okay, I'm really starting to see the thread connecting these stories.
Yeah.
It's not just blind faith. It's a very active and courageous way of living out your faith. What's the next example?
All right, so this one is about the widow of Zarephath putting God first even when she didn't have much.
Follow Kings 17, right? She gives away her last bit of food to Elijah, even though she barely has enough for herself.
It's incredible. And Reverend Yamuke ties this to the idea of defying your circumstances.
That's a tough one. It's easy to be generous when you have plenty to spare.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're facing scarcity yourself, that's a whole other challenge.
It is. But the widow shows us that real faith isn't dependent on our circumstances. It's about trusting that when you put God first, He'll always provide.
It's so easy to get caught up in that scarcity mindset, especially these days. But this story reminds us that God's abundance is always available to us.
Exactly. Okay, ready for example number 5?
Bring it up.
This one is about Naaman, the military commander, who was healed from leprosy by dipping himself in the Jordan River.
2 Kings 5. That's the one where he's furious at first, right? Like, seriously, this muddy river is supposed to cure me.
He was so close to missing out on his miracle because of his pride,
It's funny how our ego can get in the way like that.
Right, and Reverend Yamuk uses this story to highlight the importance of what he calls defying the self.
Oh, I like that, defying the self.
Our ego, our pride, our stubbornness, whatever it is that's holding us back from receiving our blessings.
Yeah, sometimes the hardest thing to defy is our own internal programming.
Absolutely. It's about letting go of the need to be right or to control the outcome.
Okay, on to the next one. 2 more to go.
All right, number 6 is about the 10 lepers who were healed on their way to show themselves to the priests.
I love that story, Luke 17. They didn't wait to see the physical evidence of their healing before taking action.
They just trusted, right?
Yeah.
Reverend Yamuki calls this defying visible reality.
So it's about that deep trust that goes beyond what we can see or touch.
It's about aligning your actions with your beliefs, even when it feels counterintuitive.
Okay, I'm ready for the final example, number 7.
This one is about the woman with the issue of blood. You know, the one who pushed through a crowd just to touch Jesus's robe.
Ah, yes, from Mark 5. She was so desperate and determined, and her faith is really inspiring.
Reverend Yamuki calls this defying obstacles. It's about refusing to let fear, doubt, or even other people's judgments hold you back from seeking healing and wholeness.
Wow, what a powerful image. It makes me think, what obstacles am I allowing to stand between me and my miracles?
That's a great question. It could be past traumas, societal pressures, even our own limiting beliefs.
So many things.
Yeah.
We've got 7 incredible examples here, each highlighting a different way to put faith into action. But how does Reverend Yamuki tie all these stories together? What's the big takeaway?
That's where it gets really interesting. He doesn't just leave these stories hanging. He goes a step further and connects each one back to a specific challenge we might face in our own lives.
I'm definitely ready to hear more about that. But I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. It's amazing how much depth there is in these familiar stories when you really start to unpack them.
Oh yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
So we'll pick up this thread in part 2 and see how Reverend Yamuki takes these biblical examples and turns them into a call to action.
Yeah, you won't want to miss it.
Okay, so we're back and we're ready to hear how those 7 examples from the Bible connect to our own lives.
All right, so remember Abraham and Isaac, that story?
Yeah, the one where he's willing to sacrifice his son.
Right, that one. Reverend Yamuki uses this to talk about defying human logic.
Defying human logic.
It's like trusting God even when things don't make any sense, even when it seems illogical or maybe even painful.
So letting go of that need to have all the answers?
Yeah, surrendering to a plan that might be way bigger than our understanding.
That's a tall order for a lot of us, I think. What about Moses parting the Red Sea?
Ah, Moses. That's about defying natural limits.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, we all have these talents, resources, relationships, and sometimes we kind of limit ourselves.
We put ourselves in a box.
Yeah, we think, oh, I'm not enough, or what I have isn't enough. But Moses didn't let the impossible stop him.
He just trusted.
Yeah, he took action. He used what he had.
It's like that saying, leap and the net will appear.
Exactly. That's what faith is all about.
Okay, so we've got defying human logic, defying natural limits. What's next?
Well, how about defying the impossible itself?
Okay, now we're talking.
Remember those priests stepping into the Jordan River?
Oh, yeah, Joshua 3. That story always gives me chills.
Yeah.
Just picturing those priests walking into a raging river with the Ark of the Covenant on their shoulders.
It's an amazing image, isn't it?
It is. And they had no guarantee that the waters would part.
Right, they just trusted.
And Reverend Yamuki is saying we all face these seemingly impossible challenges in our lives.
It could be anything. A health issue, of a financial crisis, a
Yeah.
relationship breakdown, that moment when you feel like there's just no way out.
But the priests did it. They walked right into that river, and the impossible happened.
And sometimes that's what it takes, that first step of faith.
Okay, so far we've got defying human logic, defying natural limits, defying the impossible. I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Definitely. And up next, we have the widow of Zarephath. Remember, she fed Elijah with her last bit of food?
Yeah, 1 Kings 17. That's got to be one of the toughest examples of faith.
It's hard to imagine, isn't it?
Giving away your last meal when you're barely surviving yourself.
And Reverend Yamuki calls this defying our circumstances.
It's easy to talk about faith and generosity when you're comfortable, but when you're struggling, that's a whole different story.
But the widow's story shows us that faith isn't about our circumstances. It's about putting God first, even when it's hard.
Trusting that he'll provide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we come to Naaman, the guy who was healed of leprosy after bathing in the Jordan River.
Moving Kings 5. He was so stubborn at first, right?
Yeah, he was like, this muddy river is supposed to cure me. You've got to be kidding. It's so relatable, though. Sometimes our pride gets in the way.
And that's exactly what Reverend Yamuki is talking about. He calls it defying the self.
Defying the self.
Our ego, our pride, our need to be right, all those things that hold us back.
So it's not just about changing our external circumstances.
It's also about looking inward.
doing some soul searching.
Yeah, identifying those patterns and beliefs that keep us stuck.
That's deep. Okay, what's next? The 10 lepers, remember? They were healed on their way to see the priests.
Oh, yeah. Luke 17, they didn't even wait to see if they were healed before taking action.
That's faith right there.
Yeah.
And Reverend Nyamuke calls this defying visible reality.
So it's about acting as if the miracle has already happened.
Trusting even when you don't see the evidence yet.
It's like that saying, faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase.
I like that. And finally, we have the woman with the issue of blood.
Mark 5. She was so determined to touch Jesus' robe, she pushed through a whole crowd.
Reverend Nyamke calls this defying obstacles.
Yeah, she wasn't going to let anything stop her.
It's a beautiful picture of perseverance, refusing to give up on your miracle.
It's inspiring, for sure. So we've got all these amazing examples of faith in action.
Yeah.
But where do we go from here?
Well, Reverend Nyamuke doesn't just leave us with these stories. He wants us to actually do something with them.
To put them into practice.
Exactly. He challenges us to take action.
What kind of action?
Well, he starts by asking, what's your new thing?
Our new thing.
That thing that God's calling you to do. Maybe it's a new career path, a relationship, a creative project. Whatever it is, it's that thing that both excites you and scares you a little bit.
That makes your heart beat a little faster.
Yeah, exactly. It's about identifying that thing that whispers to your soul, this is what you're meant for.
Okay, so we have to figure out our new thing. Then what?
Well, then he asks, which of those 7 biblical examples speaks to you the most?
So it's about connecting those stories to our own challenges.
Yeah. What are you facing that's preventing you from stepping into your new thing? Is it fear, lack of resources, pride? Maybe it's feeling stuck in your circumstances.
So we find the story that resonates with our situation.
Right. And then he asks the big question. What would it look like to defy that challenge through an act of faith?
So it's about taking all of this inspiration and turning it into action.
That's it. It's about doing something.
Okay, now ready. What's that one brave step we can take today to move towards our new thing?
That's the question, isn't it? And only you can answer that. But here's the good news. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need a perfect plan.
You just have to be willing to take that first step.
And trust that God will meet you there. You know what really stands out to me is that it's not just about doing things for God. It's about working together with God.
It's like a collaboration.
Yeah, co-creating something new and amazing.
So we're not just passive recipients of God's grace.
Or active participants in the unfolding of our destinies.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it. So we spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive really exploring Reverend Nyamuke's sermon.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It has. And it's not every day we get to unpack something so rich with biblical examples and this really strong call to action.
It's not just about hearing the message, it's about living it.
Putting it into practice. And I think what makes this sermon so powerful is that Reverend Nyamuke doesn't just leave us with a bunch of stories. He actually challenges us.
Yeah, he says, all right, here are these incredible examples of faith in action. Now, what are you going to do about it?
Right. He's like, figure out your new thing, identify those obstacles, and then take a leap of faith.
It's about taking ownership of your spiritual journey,
Absolutely. And speaking of ownership, what really strikes me is how this whole idea of taking action ties in perfectly with the title of his series.
Prodigies 24.
Yeah, prodigies meaning miracles or extraordinary feats. It's like this whole series has been about experiencing the power of God at work in our lives.
And then to have this sermon focusing on faith and action at the very end of the series.
It's like he's saying, okay, we've talked about all these amazing things God has done. Now it's your turn to step into that power and make your own miracles.
Right. It's an invitation to co-create with the divine.
One thing that really stood out to me was Reverend Nyamuke's use of the word defiance.
Oh, yeah, he uses that a lot.
He talks about defying logic, defying limits, defying circumstances, even defying our own fears and doubts.
It's like he's giving us permission to break free from the things that hold us back,
To say, no more, I'm not going to settle for a life that feels small.
Exactly. And it really makes you think, what are you settling for?
What's that new thing God's whispering to your heart?
That thing that excites you and terrifies you all at the same time?
Maybe it's a career change, a creative project, healing a relationship.
It could be anything, but it's probably something that requires you to step outside of your comfort zone.
And to trust that God will be there every step of the way.
You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need a perfect plan or a guarantee of success. All you need is the willingness to take that first step.
And remember, you're not alone in this. You have the support of a God who loves you and wants to see you thrive.
That's right. And as we wrap up this deep dive into Reverend Nyamuke's sermon, we want to leave you with this one final thought. What would it look like to defy those things that are holding you back?
What bold step can you take today to move towards your new thing?
Maybe it's making a phone call, having a tough conversation, or just spending some time in prayer, really listening for God's guidance.
Don't underestimate the power of even the smallest step.
It could be the start of something truly amazing.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into something inspiring.